Before this story begins, you need to hear how it ends. On the morning the storm hit Blackshore Bay, the ocean pulled back almost half a kilometer, far deeper than any tide ever should. The shoreline exposed shipwrecks no one knew existed. Crabs and fish lay stranded across wet sand. And in the center of the bay, standing alone where water should have been, was Rowan Clarke, the last tide watcher. People called his name. He didn't move. He didn't speak. And when the ocean finally came roaring back, he lifted his hand exactly once, as if giving a signal. What happened next became a legend. If you enjoy mysterious cultural stories and dramatic folklore, subscribe right now so you don't miss the next tale. Now let's go back to where it all started. Blackshore Bay is a rugged stretch of coastline on Australia's southern edge, a place where cliffs rise like broken teeth and storms roll in without warning. Most who live there fish, dive, or work the lighthouse. But for generations, families in Blackshore whispered about tide watchers, rare people who sensed changes in the sea long before they happened. They weren't prophets. They weren't mystics. They were listeners. Listeners of waves. Listeners of pressure. Listeners of the strange silence the ocean makes when something is coming. Rowan Clarke was one of them. The last one. Rowan had a strange talent since childhood. He knew when tides would shift hours before the charts predicted it. He felt storm pressure in his bones. He could stand on the sand, close his eyes, and say whether the water was rising or falling without hearing a single wave. Old locals trusted him. Tourists laughed at him. Scientists ignored him. But the sea never ignored him. Especially not in the year the tide first spoke to him. It was winter, sharp, windy, unpredictable. And Rowan woke one morning to find something strange. The ocean was breathing wrong. Not physically, rhythmically. Like someone inhaling too slowly, exhaling too fast. He felt it before he even reached the bay. Rowan stepped onto the beach just before sunrise. The sky was the color of steel wool. Wind whipped across the sand, biting his cheeks. But something was different. The waves weren't coming in the right pattern. The ocean rose in long, slow swells. Too slow. Not natural, Rowan whispered. He crouched, placed his hand on the wet sand. A vibration ran through it. Not shaking, trembling, as if something deep underwater was moving. Something large. Something waking. He stood, heart beating faster. The tide was trying to say something. Blackshore Bay had an old tradition, one almost forgotten. Each winter, the oldest family line would perform a ceremony called the first pull, where the tide's lowest point was watched from the cliffs and interpreted. It wasn't superstition. It was observation, refined over generations. A sudden low tide meant storms, undersea shifts, or danger. But an unnatural low tide meant something else entirely. Something Rowan hoped he'd never witness. At dawn 3 days later, Rowan woke with a start. His throat was tight. His vision foggy. The tide had dropped. Too fast. Too far. He ran to the cliffs barefoot. And what he saw made him freeze in place. The ocean had pulled back more than he'd ever seen. Rocks normally lost beneath the surface jutted out like drowned statues. A rusted ship hull lay exposed, empty, skeletal. Crabs scattered across silvery sand. Birds circled in confused patterns. The smell of the ocean changed. Less salt, more metal. It smelled ancient. Rowan whispered, "No, not today." But it was today. The first pull had come early. Too early. Something was wrong. Terribly wrong. What Rowan found beneath the retreating water is the part scientists still refuse to comment on. If you're still here and loving this unfolding legend, hit subscribe, because this series of cultural mysteries is only getting deeper. Now let's continue. Rowan climbed down the cliff steps and walked across the newly exposed shore. His boots crunched on wet shells. Wind howled through the rocks. Then he saw it. A shape in the sand. Massive, perfect, deliberate. A wide spiral, carved by no machine or person. Stretching almost 30 meters across the bay. An ancient ocean symbol. A tide sign. His grandmother once told him about them. When the sea draws the spiral, something is coming. Something the land alone cannot hold. Rowan knelt beside it. The sand inside the spiral was smooth. Too smooth. Polished, almost like glass. He placed his hand on it. Warm. Warm sand in the middle of winter. He tore his hand away. This wasn't natural. This was a call. But to what? The sky darkened. The wind died. Even the gulls stopped their cries. Rowan felt it before he heard it. A deep, rolling pressure moving through the air. Then, a single wave began forming at the far edge of the retreat. Slow, tall, wide enough to look endless. But it didn't move forward. It held there, waiting. Rowan's breath caught. The sea was holding the line, as if it needed permission to break. He stepped toward the center of the spiral. The wave rose higher, responding, watching him. He whispered, "I hear you." And the ocean answered. It wasn't a sound. It wasn't a word. It was a pull, a shift in pressure so strong his chest tightened. Do not let the water fall alone. He stumbled backward, shaking. The tide wasn't warning him. It was asking him, calling the tide watcher. Rowan swallowed hard. "You want a witness," he whispered. "Someone to stand with you." The silence that followed was too perfect to be accidental. He nodded and stepped into the center of the spiral. The water returns. Everything happened at once. The wave surged forward, racing across the sand like a living creature. But instead of hitting him, it split, parting around the spiral, curling inward like two great arms. The water circled him. Once, twice, faster. His hair whipped around him. Salt stung his eyes. And then, the water rose into a column around him, towering, spinning, roaring without touching him. Inside the roar was something else. A hum, low, ancient, rhythmic, not threatening, pleading. A plea from the deep. Rowan whispered, "I'm listening." And he heard it. Not this storm. Not this year. Rowan knew what this meant. Every tide watcher paid a price. His grandmother paid it. His father paid it. And now it was his turn. The sea reveals something. And takes something. "Show me," Rowan said. The water column flashed with light. Images. Flooded coves. Broken cliffs. Boats swallowed whole. A storm so vast it blotted out the coastline. Then, a different image. Rowan standing alone, holding back the water with a raised hand. Not as magic, as warning, as signal. He fell to his knees. The hum faded. Then the water collapsed around him, rushing back into the bay in a massive roar. Somewhere far behind him, he heard shouting. People running, calling his name. He didn't respond. He stared at the sea. It had shown him the future, and his place in it. For hours the sky darkened. Wind gathered strength. Birds fled inland. Locals said the air felt wrong. Like the world was waiting. Rowan climbed the rocks and walked toward the cliffs. When the storm finally struck, the ocean pulled back again, even farther than that morning. Families were terrified. But Rowan stepped forward onto the exposed sand. And then it happened. The moment from the beginning of this story. The moment people still talk about years later. Rowan stood where the tide had left him. Motionless, expression calm. The ocean towered behind him in a wall of water so tall it swallowed the horizon. Wind screamed. Sand whipped across the bay. People cried out his name. He didn't turn. Instead, he looked at the water, at the rising storm surge, at the shape the tide took as it curled over him. And then, he lifted his hand. A simple gesture. Small, controlled. A tide watcher's signal. The ocean responded instantly. The massive surge split, one half rolling toward the cliffs, the other toward the open sea. The force of it shook the entire bay, but the central wave lowered, softened, fell back into itself. The water rushed around Rowan, never touching him, never knocking him down. The storm passed, the tide obeyed, and the sea went calm. When the water settled, Rowan collapsed onto the wet sand. Villagers carried him to safety. He survived. Barely. But something changed in him. A quietness that wasn't sadness. A calm that wasn't exhaustion. He had become part of something ancient. Something the coastline remembered. After that day, the tide stayed gentle for years. Blackshore Bay prospered. Rowan never took credit. He simply walked the shore, listening, waiting, watching. People began calling him the Tide Watcher again. With respect, with gratitude, with fear. Rowan never explained what happened. Not fully. But sometimes he would speak to children and say, "When the ocean pulls back, listen carefully. It is not running away. It is gathering strength. And it always tells you the truth. if you know how to hear it. And on nights when storms gathered far offshore, locals claimed they saw Rowan walking the bay, lanterns swinging by his side, as if checking if the scene needed him again. He never gave another signal, but the water never forgot him, and neither did Blackshore Bay. If you enjoyed this legend and want more atmospheric, emotional stories about forgotten rituals, ancient signs, and the people who still hear them, subscribe right now. The next story takes us deep into the Australian desert, where an ancient fire ritual was said to burn not wood, but memories. And trust me, you don't want to miss it.